guys? Thanks for checking out the video. In today's video, we're going to be walking through all the steps that you need to go through anytime you remove those transmission bell housing bolts. That's right, those bell housing bolts. Sometimes they're a pain in the ass, and I'm going to walk you guys through my process for removing all of them. I've got a figure on the whiteboard behind me that'll help us walk through the process. I've got a bunch of tools behind me that I'm going to walk you guys through which ones work and which ones don't work. Thanks for checking out the video. I'm Luke. This is the Subaru-only show. Okay, here's the figure I've put together. So let's grab that sucker and put that aside. Basic 3/8 extension. That should be all you really need. Then grab a 14mm socket. You may take this sucker anytime you go racing. So let's grab that sucker too. That's going to make the process a hell of a lot easier for you. I definitely recommend you get one of these and add it to your tool chest. And then go ahead and take that starter and store it for all the rest of your parts. So I'm going to mark it off the list. Bam! Now before we dive into removing these bell housing bolts, I want to let you guys know that this video is actually a video in a build series where I'm removing a 2005 WRX engine from a 1998 two-door coupe. Throughout this build series, we've been referencing this build list behind me where I'm walking through 16 steps that I'm taking to remove this 2005 WRX engine. So far we've walked through the first 9 steps and we're on step 10, which is to remove the lower bell housing nuts and the starter. But in this video, I'm actually going to walk you guys through how to remove all 8 of those nuts and bolts. There's actually 6 bolts you're going to need to remove and 2 nuts. Before we head out to the car, let's take a closer look at this figure on the whiteboard so we can get a better idea of what we're going to be doing today. Okay, here's the figure I've put together. You can see I have the starter on the left side, I have the turbo on the right side, and I have transmission bell housing bolts called out right here in the middle. There's actually going to be 6 of those bolts. And then over here, I'm pointing out that this is the back of the engine, of course. And down here, you only have to remove nuts. And that's because these lower ones are actually studs on the engine. So all you have to do is remove the 2 nuts. So that's basically it. You have 6 bolts to remove, and you have 2 lower nuts to remove. Oftentimes, those nuts are the trickiest. So I'm going to walk you guys through the steps and the tools I use to get those out. Okay, let's head out to the car and take a closer look at what I'm trying to show in this figure. That way, you can connect what you're seeing in this figure to the actual parts in the car. Okay, I'm showing you a view from the rear of the engine on the passenger side. Right here at the bottom of the screen is a turbo. And if you'll remember on that figure, right next to that turbo, there's actually going to be 2 bolts on the transmission bell housing that you're going to have to remove. The first of those 2 bolts is this one right here, and that's one of the easiest ones to get at. And then immediately below it, about 3 or 4 inches, is the second bolt. That bolt is also relatively easy to get at. You can actually get this one with a socket and a short extension and use your ratchet. Both these bolts, right to the left of the turbo, are really easy to get at, but I actually loosen and leave this bolt in up until the very end. This is the bolt that I actually use to hold the engine transmission together till the very end when the engine's all put up in the hoist. So all we're going to do is loosen this bolt. We're not actually going to pull it all the way out. All these bolts and the 2 nuts on the bottom are going to be 14mm. But I'm going to walk you guys through which 14mm ratchet, socket, or open-end wrench combination I use for each one of these bolts. That's going to make the process a hell of a lot easier for you. Okay, now we're back in the shop, and hopefully what I've drawn on this figure makes a little bit more sense. We actually have to remove 6 of those transmission bell housing bolts, and then we have to remove those 2 nuts on the bottom. Now the tools that I'm going to recommend that you use to remove these bolts and nuts are actually over here on my worktop bench. First off, I'm not telling you guys you need to use all these tools. I'm actually showing you guys all the different tools that you could use to remove a 14mm nut and a bolt. These are all the different types of tools that I've tried using, and I'll tell you right now, they definitely don't all work. Over here on the right side, I've got a bunch of ratchets going from a normal 3/8 size all the way to a big ass breaker bar with a 1/2 inch size. Even though it'd be nice, I can tell you right now, this big ass 1/2 inch breaker bar just won't fit in a lot of the tight spots in this engine compartment. I actually end up using this extended 3/8 ratchet with a pivoting head. So let's grab that sucker and put that aside. We'll definitely be using that guy. Okay, over here on the upper left, I have a bunch of extensions. I've got 1/2 inch extensions, I've got 3/8 extensions. I really only need 1 extension, and that's going to be this middle size 3/8 extension. So grab that short, basic 3/8 extension. That should be all you really need. Then grab a 14mm socket. Okay, and then I have all these wrenches. I got a bunch of different ratcheting and non-ratcheting, box-ended and open-ended wrenches, going from a short, stubby, snap-on sucker to a pivoting, ratcheting box-ended sucker right here that I've used for a lot of the applications on this engine removal, to a wide assortment, all the way up to this badass, long, ratcheting box-ended wrench. This one's great to use, but unfortunately it's a little bit too long for most of those tight spots on this Subaru engine. So again, I can't quite use the longest one. I go to the next size down. This guy's great. It's an offset box-ended wrench, and it's got a really small body around the end, so it can get in those tight spots. It's got a 14mm on one side and 12mm on the other side, and it's offset, so it works great to get up inside around that nut so you can loosen it. This sucker is definitely one of my go-to wrenches, and I take this sucker anytime I go racing. So let's grab that sucker too. Alright, we've got our tools, and to be honest, these are really the only tools I ever really need to remove these bell housing bolts and those lower nuts. So let's head up to the car and start removing some nuts and bolts. Okay, starting on the upper passenger side, let's go ahead and loosen this one first. To loosen this sucker, you're actually going to want to remove transmission dipstick. Get that sucker out of the way, there's no reason to have it there. It's also a good idea to plug that or put a rag over it. But now that dipstick is removed, you can get this bolt really easily. So grab that short extension and the 14mm socket and throw it on with a ratchet and loosen that bolt. Remember, I'm going to leave this bolt in to the very end. Okay, that bolt's loose, so thread it in hand tight and just leave it like that for now. Now for the next bolt, that's the one that's right below it, 3 or 4 inches, right to the left of the turbo. Your socket and your ratchet should work there, no problem. This bolt we can go ahead and remove all the way and pull it on out. Bam! Alright, we got the first bolt down of 6. Okay, moving down to that bottom bolt on the passenger side, you should be able to get that short extension with a socket on that bolt as well. Okay, you can go ahead and take this bolt all the way out as well. Okay, that's the second bolt of 6. These are coming out really easily. Next, I'll move down to this lower nut. This is the nut. It's a pain in the butt because you can't put a socket and extension on it because it's right behind that CV right here. So how do you get that sucker off? That offset box-ended wrench works perfect for this nut. Grab that offset box-ended wrench, put over that nut, and then go ahead and loosen that sucker. You've already soaked it with penetrating compound. It shouldn't be too difficult. And if your box-ended wrench has a decent length to it, you should be able to apply enough force to get that sucker loosened. Okay, go ahead and take this nut all the way off. And bam, we got one of our 2 nuts off. Time to move over to the driver's side. Okay, now we've moved over to the driver's side on the rear of the engine, and we're going to remove these upper 2 transmission bell housing bolts. These bolts actually serve 2 purposes. They hold your starter in place, and they're holding your transmission to your engine. We're going to remove both these bolts and take them out completely. That short extension with a 14mm socket should work perfect. And then go ahead and remove that bolt completely. Now keep track of that bolt and that separate little ground terminal connection. A lot of times that bolt is actually a little bit longer than the other bell housing bolts, so make sure you put that bolt back in the same location. Then move on to that lower bolt right below the starter. For this bolt, having a ratchet that has one of those pivot heads really makes it a lot easier. I definitely recommend you get one of these and add it to your tool chest. Now that we've loosened it, you can actually see that the starter is starting to separate from that transmission bell housing. Sometimes this bolt can get a little bit bound up on the weight of the starter, so go ahead and hold the weight of that starter with the other hand. That way you can loosen that bolt and take it all the way out. Okay, one more bolt out, and we can go ahead and remove the starter as well. Don't forget to remove all those little electrical connections from that starter. Looks like there's one more that I had forgotten to disconnect. And then go ahead and take that starter and store it with all the rest of your parts. Ah, bam, I'll put it right there. Okay, now we're going to move on to the last bolt on the driver's side down here towards the bottom. You should be able to get a socket and a ratchet on that sucker. And then go ahead and take that bolt all the way out. Bam, that's the last bolt. We actually left one bolt in, but it's already loosened, and that one's just in there for safety while we lift this engine. So we've actually taken care of all 6 of these bolts. Now we just have to move on to that last nut, and this engine is pretty much completely disconnected from this transmission. Like we did on the other side, for this bottom nut, I like to use that offset 14mm box-ended wrench. And remember, if that sucker's tight, make sure you soak it with some penetrating compound. Okay, bam, that's the second bottom nut, and we are all done. This engine is pretty much completely unbolted from this transmission. Alright guys, and just like that, we are done with another step off this master list, and we are one step closer to getting this engine out of this car. So let's head over to that master list and mark this one off. Here's that master list for removing that 2005 WRX engine from my 1988 two-door coupe. We've worked our way down this master list, and we're all the way down here to number 10, the lower bell housing nuts and the starter. We've completed that step, so I'm going to mark it off the list. Bam. The next one on the list is the engine mount crossmember nuts. That one's a really easy step. And then we'll jump down here to step number 12, the clutch release fork shaft. That's something you gotta remove, and it's a hurdle for some people, but I'm gonna walk you guys through the steps. It's not too difficult once you've seen it done. We'll walk through those 2 steps in the next video. But for now, I'm going to wrap it up there for today, guys. Thank you so much for checking out the video. This video has been on removing those transmission bell housing bolts and those lower nuts. I also walk through which tools I use to get at those suckers quickly and easily. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave it in the comments section. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a like. I'm Luke, this is the Subaru Only Show. Until next time, guys, later!